had to cancel suddenly the talk that was scheduled. We hope to have it soon, so we will make an announcement on that. But today we have Jiyoung speaking to us from London. Jiyoung?
Hi, oh sorry, hello everyone. Hi from London.
What time is it now?
Oh yeah, it's like 3 past 10 now here.
Excellent. So
what time?
For your talk today. Jiyoung was with us 2 years ago on residency in AVA and had a very interesting presentation alongside Jocelyn McGregor at the end of her residency. And we've invited Jiyoung back to tell us about her residency here in Hong Kong and to generally share her art practice with you, and also maybe discuss how she's been dealing with making work during this. So Jiyoung, welcome. Thank you for visiting us virtually.
Thank you for having me. And hello everyone. Sorry, I'm gonna change the setting a bit. Okay, better. So hello from London, and thanks for joining me, and thanks for having me. I especially want to thank Tom, Sunday, Lillian, and everyone who organized this event and invited me to this wonderful event. My experience in Hong Kong means a lot for me, so I'm really grateful that I can have this chance to think and talk about how my experience doing this artist residency in Hong Kong has still a lasting effect in my practice so far after 2 years. So thank you very much again. So today I'm going to talk about my practice in relation to my experience in Hong Kong. But I'm going to be also a bit read-ish because I just can't do it totally off the top of my head. So if you notice my eyeballs kind of like moving like I'm reading something, please ignore that. I really appreciate that ignorance. And please feel free to interrupt during the talk. Any kind of question is welcome. And yeah. So before going on to the talk, I'm briefly gonna show you 3 studio spaces that I had in the last couple of years. I was the artist in residence at the AVA from March to May in 2018, 2 years ago. It was right after I completed my master's degree in Slade, so it was kind of like my first proper studio that I had after the finishing the art school. So I felt really grateful that I could have this amazing studio within the Kaika campus as kind of like my first proper studio after art school. And what I liked the most, I think, about the studio was that when I opened the door of the studio, you know, because of the unique structure of the AV building, I could get the fresh air immediately when I opened the door, which was really nice. So I will talk in detail later about what I made during this residency based on some sort of inspiration that I got from Hong Kong as a non-Hong Konger or stranger. And since the residency, I've been kind of back and forth between Seoul and London, but was mostly working in my Seoul studio in this picture. So it was the studio that I got after I finished the residency. And it was like a self-contained studio, which was 30 minutes away from my house. But I feel like I was too lazy to walk, so I almost always took a bus, which is not good. So at the beginning, it was like a perfect size for me until I realized that after I had my first solo show, I had to like store all my paintings in the studio as well. So I used this studio around 1.5 years. The good thing about the studio was that I had my own space, you know, and at the same time, there was this bigger studio next door, which was shared by 3 amazing artists. So whenever I needed my own time and space, I could simply hide in my studio. But at the same time, I didn't feel too lonely because the bathroom that I could use was inside of the bigger studio. So I was kind of in and out all the time whenever I needed to use like toilet or sink. So whenever I bumped into other artists, we had like short conversation about how things are going or about each other's upcoming exhibitions, which was really nice. And it also had this amazing rooftop that I could use whenever I needed to do some like sanding or spraying. So I really enjoyed my 1.5 years of working here. And now I'm here, I'm in London, and this is where I am at the moment. I put this picture hoping to build some kind of intimacy in this cold video chat environment. If you imagine me sitting right there at the desk. So I came to the UK in early February. I think it was right before, you know, the number of cases started blowing up in South Korea. And by the time, like, everything was so normal in the UK. So this is actually a spare bedroom inside of our flat. So I'm like, you know, one of those lucky ones that have access to the studio, because many of my friends who are here in the UK, I mean, some of them are having maybe a studio nearby enough, walkable or reachable by cycling. But many of them are still, you know, not able to work in their studio. So making small works or do drawings or writings, whatever they can do within this limited space of their room or house. So I would say I'm really lucky in this sense, and hopefully everything would settle down soon. I would say it's still really clean in my standard in comparison to my super messy studio that I had in Seoul. Not much stuff going on yet. So these days I'm using this studio as kind of a space that where I can think or write or do some drawings rather than making it large work. Because I feel like after the residency, I was kind of continuously making and making, and I didn't really have this chance to sit at the desk and think about what I've been really trying to say so far through my works. So preparing for this talk has been really amazing in this sense. And I'm just, you know, trying to take advantage of this lockdown situation, I guess. And what I've been trying to do recently was to pick up a thread and weave through seemingly unrelated issues that are scattered in my mind. So today's talk is gonna follow this kind of recent train of thoughts surrounding my practice. So it might be not very clear to you guys because I'm not gonna show my works either in chronological order or into certain categories. It's definitely a bit less structured than how I normally present my works. But I will try my best to make it sound comprehensible and not to bore you out too much. So thanks for joining again.
Jiyoung,
Sorry?
Jiyoung, we have our first question, actually, if it's okay for you.
Really? Already? Oh, great. What's the question?
If you can go back to the previous slide, Ron is asking what is on the floor.
Oh, which one?
Ron?
Yeah, you've got
Hello?
this. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Sure. My question was, what is the floor covering on your bedroom studio? That looks like a great solution.
Oh, it's like because the carpet is carpet floor, I couldn't really work on a carpet floor. I just put some it's kind of jigsaw tile, I guess. It's normally used for like gym or like children's playroom.
It looks like a great solution. That's why I was at it.
Yeah, it's been great.
Really clever.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, so now on to the talk. So I decided to take a picture with this title in our balcony, which is helping a lot stay sane during this quarantine. So the title of this talk is What Time Is It Now? How to Break Water into Pieces. And it came from my recent thoughts about the idea of time and its fluidity. You know, because of the situation, I'm avoiding going anywhere else apart from supermarket, where I go maybe in every 10 days. So recently I've been experiencing only two possible options of space, which is home and supermarket. Of course, when I have like incredible cabin fever, I sometimes go for a walk, but I'm talking more in terms of space inside, I think. And the interesting thing is that the less space I experience, the more I've started thinking about this notion of time. And this reminds me of the fact that we become super conscious of the passage of time when we are on the plane. So this is the work by Isaac Yazgan in our recent solo show in Houserworth in London. It was one of the few shows that I managed to catch before lockdown, and I was like, I might gonna put a picture of her work when I'm talking about play. It is, you know, where our scope of space that we can occupy is like massively limited. So normally my body movement is like confined into that of a seat that we are assigned to. Or if you're walking around, it can be maximum the space within the plane. And I think it's one of those situations where we ask that question about the current time the most. And imagine if you're like on the plane for more than 10 hours. I personally really hate long flights that I don't want to even think about it. I just, when I'm on the long flight, I can't stop checking my clock and asking what time it is so that I can escape from that situation as soon as possible. But I recently realized that I've never managed to find like a perfectly right answer to that question, because when I ask myself what time it is while floating in between the borders of different time zones, is the answer supposed to be based on where I departed from, or where I'm going towards, or over which country I'm hovering at the moment? So I feel like this question about the current time is actually quite tricky, despite the fact that it is at the same time the most common questions in our daily lives. And you know, if I ask the same question to you guys now, the same problem happens because we are all in a different location. So to answer the question myself, it's a 10:15 in the morning here. But I'm sure the answers that you guys have found must be different from mine according to where you are. So this is a picture of my table. I have two clocks. One is set to the UK time, and the other is to the time in Seoul. It's just to make sure that I don't call or email someone in South Korea in a ridiculous time, like 3 in the morning. And I usually call my parents in the afternoon in the UK and the evening in South Korea. And we just talk about normal stuff. Like I normally ask about how things are going, is everything okay, or any interesting news. And the time difference between where I am and where my family are is 8 hours. But what I want to ask is, does that mean that they are living 8 hours ahead of me? Are they like kind of in the future? Let's say between London and Hong Kong, you guys are like 7 hours ahead of the UK, but you're listening what I'm saying right now in real time. So it's not like I can ask you guys how's the world's like after 7 hours in the future. So it sounds ridiculous, but I feel like it's the way we understand the notion of time. So the fact that we call the current time with different names doesn't mean that we are in a different position on the axis of time, because time never required its name. It's just how we agree to call it. So this naming has nothing to do with the time itself. And I feel like this active naming adds quite an alien nature to the time, which is discontinuity. For example, today is the 22nd of May, according to how we named it. And I just realized it's almost the end of May, which means the half of 2020 is already gone. But the question I want to address is, how do we define this boundary between May and June? If you think about time as a flow or time as a flow or time as a stream, it doesn't have that kind of sudden ruptures. I want to talk about the moment when I was about to have my 7th birthday. I was kind of thinking weirdly because, you know, when you're little, you just think as weird as possible. So I was kind of one of those. So I kind of thought that the very moment that I would turn 7 years old, I thought my appearance and the way I thought would have completely changed somehow. And of course, when the clock ticked the midnight of my birthday, nothing exciting happened. I looked the same. I was thinking in the same way. So the change over time and through the passage of time is gradual rather than sudden. And I think that's the nature of time. So it's what I mean by time having like no boundaries or ruptures. I feel like it's rather in a state of liquid or fluid because it doesn't have a definite form. So its form is totally like dependent on where it is going to be contained. And I think it's pretty much similar to the way the shape of water relies on the shape of the drinking glass. And I think its fluidity is the very reason why the concept of time is so difficult to define. So we invented some containers to put time in, like it can be a clock, it can be a calendar, or any sort of timelines. But I also think that it definitely helps us track the passage of time, but these devices are those that actually hinder us from understanding the true nature of time, because the flow of time is now represented by this medium that has more to do with space rather than time. And so among those devices, I made a series of works last year, specifically about the idea of calendar. So it was one of the works that I showed in the last solo show. I think talking about the title of the show would help me articulate better. So I titled the show as One After Another. Well, when I was trying to come up with the title, I hoped it to like imply the fact that there are different ways of arrangement because of the different nature of things in order. For example, if you think about like solid matters, like ordinary objects that are around us, they can't occupy the same place at the same time, which makes them be placed next to another. Whereas if you think about those in more like liquidy or powdery forms, they similarly permeate through one another. And I think the calendar makes time, which is more like liquidy, into something that should be juxtaposed like solid matters. So for me, it's kind of say when we knead dough by mixing water and flour, this calendar is kind of working as a device that harden this liquid-like nature of time in lumps so that we can snap them off and juxtapose a day next to another, so that we can count them with numbers for our sake of convenience. So how we perceive time becomes more, I feel like it becomes more about discontinuity than continuity, or it becomes more about quantity rather than quality, or you can also say that it becomes more about juxtaposition in space rather than successive moments in time. So based on these sort of ideas about the fact that the way we perceive time is highly rendered by the formal qualities of the medium. I made this series which consists of 12 panels, and each work is based on each month of the 2019 calendar, which is the year that I made this. I'm not sure if you could see this, but it horizontally shows words from 1 to 365, and vertically displays this color gradient. I put this picture in progress because I think it'll help you understand what I mean. So when I was working, I configured 12 panels in this way, 3x4. So from top left is January, February, March, April, May, June, and so on. And the list of words from 1 to 365 proceeds from top left to the bottom right. And the color is also gradually changing. I just decided to change this configuration when I was installing in the gallery. And I've also put this egg-shaped plaster cast. Actually, the most common question that I had when I had the show was like, people ask me if these dates with eggs have like special meaning to me, like are they birthdays of my family or friends? But unfortunately, the answer was no. It was determined totally random at the start of installation, based on whether it looked good here or there. So there was no meaning about it. But I've been thinking about my decision to put this eggs in the calendar. I can't put my finger on it yet, but egg is a motif that I'm quite obsessed with at the moment. Like, I think when I was putting eggs in this work, I was especially thinking about, you know, when you buy eggs from a supermarket, they're always in this box of 12 or 30 eggs. And I think this box, which contains 30 eggs, kind of erases their peculiar existence, because each egg is inherently different being. But then by being contained in this box, I feel like they are rendered into this commodity with the same guaranteed quality. And I thought it was somehow reminiscent of the way we consider, let's say, every Monday so identical to another. Because, you know, whenever it becomes Monday, we say, oh, it's Monday again. I say that again. I say that a lot. And I feel like this phrase shows us that we consider every Monday the same, even though this Monday and next Monday, they're never the same and inherently different. So I also want to talk about this process, because this process of mixing plaster or silicate and pouring them into molds is still quite a familiar process for me. The way I normally work is more like working on computer or mixing colors. So I guess my normal process working has less to do with something solid. Of course, like when you're mixing the plaster or silicone, it is liquidy at first, but you need to wait it to be hardened. And whilst I was like mixing this plaster powder with water and waiting for it to cure, I felt like it's quite similar to the process where this stream of time is petrified this calendar. So I remember I was quite happy realizing it during the process. So the concept of time is one of those that intrigued me. And I think there are a few other examples of this kind except time. For example, like the form of color or species existing in nature, or thoughts, histories, or feelings, memories, or sensations. These words, when you hear these words, you feel like these are kind of too abstract or changeable or indefinite or intangible to be fully understood by us. So these ideas have been expressed or represented through this human-made devices like calendar or color codes, taxonomy, text, image, or museum. But again, I think like the case of calendar that rendered this time into something discontinuous, I feel like the same thing happens in these cases as well. And about this, I would like to quote a passage of an amazing article written by Eugenio Donato in 1979. So this is one of his articles, The Museum's Furnace, and it's about the way museums have been sustaining their privilege and power by claiming that they're representing the whole human history through the collection of artifacts and fragments of artifacts that they have acquired. So I guess I'm just gonna read it. So the function of the geologist is to reconstruct a continuous temporal history out of the fragments handed down to him. Attempting to understand the history of the globe through geological fragments is as futile as trying to understand human history through archaeology, namely a continual temporal order where there are actually only disconnected fragments. I feel like it's a bit aggressive, but I love this quote because it shows, I think it just shows brilliantly how this idea of continuum is constrained by the formal qualities of the media through which it's expressed. In this case, is exemplifying how the idea of history is represented by the museums. And to trace back to the point when I started thinking about this kind of relationship between formal qualities and its content of the medium, I think it was actually during this artist residency in Hong Kong, and that's why it means a lot for me. So thanks for the opportunity again. So this is the work that I made during this residency, which became sort of a starting point. So it was obviously about the color green, and I wanted to show how we've been selecting and naming a few specific colors out of the whole natural blend of different colors from nature. And I think this picture draws comparison in a fairly good way. So this is a view from this amazing staff accommodation in Sha Tin, where we stayed during this residency. And on the left corner, I put color charts of Winsor & Newton's. And you can see how we've been using only this limited number of greens. And of course we mix them when we paint, but I think I'm more talking in terms of material rather than process. So as a painter, I realized I always just bought a few primary colors from art supply shops and never thought of where they actually came from. But then I encountered this book by Abraham G. Werner, who was a geologist and mineralogist from back in the 19th century. And this amazing book shows his effort to like systematize this color by selecting and ordering a few and naming them from mixed up tints and shades and model. So when I saw this book, I was intrigued by the way we've been like extracting some colors out of mixed up colors in nature and how we've been trying to define each color with certain names. But then I also started wondering, like, at which point it should be called olive green and at which point should it be grass green? And what happens to those colors in between that haven't been named yet? And where is the like exact boundary between blue and green and yellow? And who has decided the scope of each category of colors? So I made this work in response to these questions based on this color example of different greens from his book, I made them reflect each other so that the frames on the left is kind of functioning as an, I don't know, eyedropper tool in Photoshop, and like these selected sampled colors could be displayed on the right. And this linen was quite a spontaneous decision. I just got a roll of linen from an alleyway in Hong Kong, which was full of the fabric shops. But then after I ordered it, I had to wait for a week or so. So meanwhile, I was thinking about the way things were arranged in Hong Kong. I mean, like in South Korea, where I'm from, is also such a small country with so many people. So I thought we were quite good at arranging stuff to save some space. But apparently after I saw all the shops and houses in Hong Kong, I thought like, oh, we have a long way to go. They are so much better than us. So I was so impressed by how like everything was designed to be hung and foldable in the like most space-saving way. And I went to this goldfish market, and to be honest, I was a bit overwhelmed, and I found it a bit upsetting because it was too brutal. Like how every fish is trapped and hung with numbers on them. When I told it to one of Hong Kong people that I met there, I think he told me that, oh, they change every day, like if this fish is going to be on display today, it's going to go back to his fish tank next day. So they're taking care of them. But then, I don't know, I was still like feeling not very great about it. So I started playing with these fish toys that I found from the goldfish district. And like, I painted them with acrylic colors of different greens. And I've also put numbers on them and installed them in a way how this goldfish market displays them, so that this painting and this wall-based sculpture is kind of like reflecting one another. So this is the installation view of our show Jiyoung Yoo, which means mermaid. You know, we also use this Chinese characters though, and mermaid we just call Jiyoung Yoo. So when I heard like when like you guys put May in front of Jiyoung Yoo, I was like, it was a bit interesting to me because this mermaid always have to be beautiful. I don't know. Anyway, Jocelyn, who is another artist in residence with me, came up with this title. And I think the nature of mermaid being like half fish and half human reflected both of our works really well. Like if you see the Jocelyn's sculpture of body parts with the scale textures, and my works about the way we select and order nature for our understanding. Yeah, I was really happy with this show. So I think until now I talked about this idea of time and the form of color in nature. So when I talk about this sort of ideas which are indefinite, changeable, intangible, or continuous, and how they're translated by certain mediums with certain formal qualities, I often liken it to the relationship between water and a drinking glass. I think I've already mentioned briefly when I was talking about this notion of time. I just find this way a water glass shapes its content to its own form as one of the most brilliant examples that mirror the way the formative medium interferes its content. So I made this table to show you guys. It's not like based on any kind of proven study or whatever. It's just sort of my private theory about the way some mediums work. So you might not agree with it, but I just think that they're usually conventionally within the succession or chain of structures. Like when you want to express our thoughts or feelings, memories, sensations, whatever, we try to translate them into visual or verbal language. And the way they work is like, for example, linear text, they reside on a page and it constitutes a book in total. And within painting, it also works in a similar way, like a collection of visual signs are like placed on a canvas or supports a painting, which becomes part of an exhibition in a gallery space. And I think these can simply be likened to water glasses stacked up together. Of course, it's not reflecting it precisely, but I'm just trying to, I guess, drawing an analogy. And I have especially been intrigued by this similarities between the format of writing and painting. So I made this work last year, which is also the cover image of this talk, if you've noticed. It's titled Anti-C. So I put a few writing spaces in this work, like notebook paper, or I don't know what's exactly called in English, but when I Googled it, it's apparently squared manuscript for the Korean alphabet, such a long name. But I think in cultures where people write kanji or Chinese characters also use this sort of paper, so I think you might be familiar with it. But anyway, I'm just going to call it a manuscript paper. So in this manuscript paper, I've employed this glass as kind of a basic morphological unit, so to speak. And I place both images and objects in a kind of arbitrary order. And you can see how the core idea of nomenclature of color that I made during this residency, it still lingers here. So like if you see the strip of color gradient on the left, I extracted some of the colors and put them in the glasses. And I also wanted to show how a gloss shapes the water into its own form, which is also implied by this title, Anti-C. So you see some of them are in the form of gloss without gloss. And when I made this work, I was actually quite happy because of the fact that I could finally be able to bring this water glass as an actual material of my work, because I started drawing this analogy as a metaphor at first. So here is my first solo exhibition, Spilled Water. So these are the installation views of the show. And I think you will kind of get a clue why the show is titled as Spilled Water. So I had this show in October 2018 after I finished the residency in May on the same year. So I had to make all this works within 3 to 4 months. It was quite tough. So the gallery was not like a pristine white cubes, as you can see. Maybe you can see better in this picture. So it's quite unconventional in terms of its configuration. So the director of the gallery said like he converted this old house into the gallery. So it consists of 3 small rooms, and they used to be different rooms, I guess, inside the house. And you can see like this even smaller room inside of a room with a tiled wall. But the ceiling of that smaller room was really low. I knocked my head for 100 times. So it was such an interesting and fun space to work, because I feel like in long term, you're gonna have less opportunity to show your works in this kind of unconventional settings. so I was really glad that I could have my first solo show in the space. It was really fun space to work, but at the same time was quite challenging because the space is like divided into pretty small rooms, and my works were not that small. So these panels, each of these panels is like 120 by 200 centimeters. So once I put like one panel in a room, it pretty much looked too cramped already. But luckily I somehow managed in the end. I think playing with different arrangement of these smaller pieces in the picture that I had around panels helped me a lot. So anyway, going back to the work, I started conceiving the show by drawing this analogy between a water glass and it supports the painting, and also between water and this image. So I was thinking like water has this utility value to be consumed, which it becomes only possible when it's contained within a glass. And the supportive painting also provides this physical base for its image so that the viewers can come and see them. And I thought this active scene within the realm of painting is kind of equivalent to the active drinking when it comes to water, because of course image is not physically exhausted by the viewers, but if you think like both painting and a cup are functioning as a sort of tool in a sense to deliver something to the users. But what I realized was also that this glasses supports at the same time delimit either the nature of its content or the possibilities of this visual elements to be arranged within its own rectangular frame. So if you imagine the image or water gets out of their support or glass somehow, I think they will manage to get free from the restrictions and they're going to be retrieving their own peculiar nature. But I think because of that very nature, I think it also has to take this risk of being disappearing or evaporating. So I was kind of thinking in this way in this show. So I imagine this unusual situation where the supports and image could coexist independently from one another. I was also imagining like water spilled through a hole in a glass, but the water being not evaporating for some reason. So I just wanted to see how it would highlight this dilemma within their relations. So you can see like these elements are from holes of these panels. And I also borrowed the image of stickers that I collected when I was little. And these image pieces from two panels are like mixed in this room. And I also kind of let the image elements be liberated from the panels so that they can find their own way to be arranged together. And the arrangement of these image pieces varies depending on different spaces they're going to be installed. I don't know, it's kind of like my unconscious habit that I cannot put my finger on. I just tend to make work to be flexible enough in terms of installation according to different spaces. You know, just like the calendar series that I showed you earlier, even though I configured them into 3x4 when I was working on it, the arrangement totally changed when I was installing them in the gallery. So it's kind of like my unconscious decision that I constantly make when I'm like planning the work. I can't really explain reason exactly, but I guess this flexibility gives me this freedom, I guess, in when I'm installing the work so that I can make full use of space. And this work was also in the show, also in the same way, but I guess more with a concrete image. So this time, instead of stickers, I borrowed a page with a plate from a book about birds. And there is also an egg version published in the 19th century. And I think in hindsight, I got this idea of birds from my visit to aviary in Hong Kong. I'm sure you know, it's like inside of this Hong Kong park. I think I was fascinated by this in the same way I was interested in like zoological or botanical approach to understanding the nature. Um, I don't have any like in-depth knowledge about taxonomy as a field of study, but the way they just label them with numbers and place one species next to another, I think I'm just interested in that kind of things. And the way they try to make a tablet of nature by using this constellation of different species. So again, they can be displayed in a flexible arrangement. And this is the egg version. This time I ordered these image elements and signs. I quite like that small room. I think it used to be a built-in wardrobe. And when I put my eggs in that room, it kind of looked like an incubation room for eggs, which I like for some reason. And this is the close-up picture to give you some ideas about the texture of my work. So from these works, you can see like how none of them are hung on the wall. So I often let my paintings sit on the floor and just lean against the wall instead of hanging them. I think there are a few different reasons behind the decisions, but one of the factors that makes me to do so, I think, is the fact that painting almost always have to be hung on the wall. And I feel like this common vocabulary of showing and displaying paintings sometimes makes them as a passive object whose agency is almost inert. And also if painting is hung on the wall, it looks like as if it's an object free from gravity, like how the pictorial space within the painting can be seen as a space without one as well. But we all know that painting could be hung on the wall thanks to the existence of gravity, and kind of think that it is something that is so neglected within painting conversations. So I just try to consider gravity as one of the important factors in my work. And yeah, so because of several different reasons, I become interested in this configuration of two planes placed in parallel, like canvas and the wall. So which has sustained its validity for such a long time. So I'm going to show you some works that I made thinking about this relationship between painting and the wall. And so this one was in my later show, One After Another. And when I was planning the show, I was thinking like how to make use of those windows. I felt like they're quite unique things, so I wanted to make a work that responds to this architectural feature. So I imagined the wall as a sort of paper, thinking that paper can be a channel for both text and image. So materiality or texture of paper often appears in my works. And through that motive, I kind of played this painterly structure, both as say external relation to the wall and internal relation to its like visual elements that is trying to deliver to the viewers. And there are also silhouettes of citrus fruits, if you can see them. It's not obvious, but they're lime, orange, and grapefruit. Maybe this picture will show it better. Yeah, because these citrus fruits happen to have like this serial structure within them. When you like peel them off, it consists of a group of smaller pieces inside. And each smaller piece also has its own thin layer, which wraps around even smaller pulps. So I think I've been quite interested in this kind of a chain of structures that certain object can have. And this one, I also use the wallpaper to activate the wall. This was made back in 2017. It was one of the works that I showed in my degree show, A Slade. When I made this, I was particularly thinking about the fact that within this relationship of the two planes, is always the canvas that has this image, whereas the wall sort of always functions as a mere backdrop for it. So I was curious what would happen if I switched these roles between the two planes. So I left the canvas as this blank surface and let it hand over its role of like delivering image to the wall. And I'm just gonna quickly go through other works that were in this degree show as well. I guess at the time, even now when I'm like making works, I'm just more into this approach of understanding painting as an object rather than like focusing entirely on its picture plane, because I feel like a picture plane can be sometimes too loud or too dominant for us to like notice the existence of other factors within painting. So I've been curious about is hidden elements underneath this picture plane, like what's going on behind the canvas or the gap between the surface and the wall. And sometimes, I don't know, I was curious about the halo underneath the canvas or the other side of paintings. That's actually how I let it sit on the floor rather than hanging on the wall. Because in this way, I think it becomes more object-like and environmental because both our fit and painting are standing on the same floor. And I like that idea of sharing. And you can actually see this gap between the wall and the canvas. So these works consist of multiple panels leaning against the wall. And I kind of wanted them to bring about this balance between like this digitally manipulated image on the surface that I made and inkjet printed on canvas, and also physical cutouts or physical layering of different panels so that it combines the sense of like, let's say, guidance or the depth. Yeah, so that was my degree show in 2017. And I'm gonna show you a couple of projects that I did in Seoul. I put these because I thought it's gonna be also a relevant issue in Hong Kong. So you know, Seoul is also already a highly densely populated area like Hong Kong. And this issue of the lack of living space and soaring rents is so connected to the tendency not to buy artworks because you don't have space. You don't have space to put your artworks. And even though maybe you can buy some like works by emerging young artists, you have no space, then there is no point of buying it. And many people actually live in this rented flat. So when you're living in someone else's house, this idea of decorating your house becomes somehow pointless, you know? I'm sure some rich people still buy works by big names, but some like middle-class collectors stop buying arts, at least in Seoul. So in response to that, there was this movement by young artists starting to make smaller works and more affordable, more sellable works. I guess it can be anything smaller and affordable. It can be simply a smaller work, or it can be a drawing or artist book, or it can be merchandise that you made based on your work, like stickers or key rings or t-shirts or whatever. Or it can be also a byproduct of your art making process. So this movement, I feel like it has culminated in 2015, which is already 5 years ago. So it's not like currently a new thing or meaningful thing or trendy thing. But there are still some like events or exhibitions or mini art fairs that happen annually. So I thought, as Hong Kong and Seoul are kind of sharing this common problem of the lack of space, I thought it might be of your interest. So I'm just going to show you a couple of projects that I made for those kind of events. So I was invited to this event, and the organizer wanted us to make works that are smaller enough to fit in this cubic box in the picture. And I think it was like either 60 by 60 by 60 or 40 by 40 by 40, so was pretty small. And this is the work that we made. So I collaborated with another amazing artist, Jiyoung Yoo, who is also one of my great friends, because we are kind of sharing this common interest in how image or information become different according to different modes of representation or mediums. So I decided to bring her into this project. And we suppose this cubic space as a sort of miniature version of a white cube. So you can also say like, we regard it as a kind of a model in a sense. And we made these furniture-like structures together. And Jiyoung made this distorted bananas. And I made a series of like citrus fruits in a different format so that they can be arranged within this furniture/structures. And this is the work that I made for another project. This painting or drawing was the one that I was kind of testing on while making the other work with eggs, if you remember. So it was kind of like a byproduct of my art making process. So I framed it and put a handle on top, I don't know, for the buyer's convenience of carrying it. And on the back of it, I put this instruction guide, certificate of authenticity, and some common strips and nails for hanging. And I especially enjoyed making this IKEA style instruction for my painting. So it has like a list of components, or how to carry the painting, how to install the painting, various ways to put your painting in your house, how to maintain the painting. And at the end, I also provide my contact detail just in case you have a problem with the painting. So it was kind of a painting kit in a sense. And making this sort of a painting kit reminds me of how painting as a commodity works. And I guess I wanted to address in a, I don't know, less serious way, let's say. So yeah, that was like projects that were quite active in Korea for a moment. And this is the last work of today's talk. I started working on it in early 2019, which is last year. And I managed to finish right before I vacated my studio in Seoul. So it took me around 1 year to finish it. I thought a lot whether I should actually show this work or not, because I'm kind of still processing what I've made, basically. So when I was planning this work, I was thinking of one of the painting's problems or natures that I spotted. So one day I started suddenly thinking that painting is inherently an object that masquerades as something else by using its layer or skin. And it made me feel not so good, because if you think about the physical nature of painting, there's almost nothing more than a skin within painting. But then I also started wondering if we consider this painting surface as a skin, and as our skin is functioning in a certain way, for example, it wraps around this insides and help them keep their positions, or it also stops blood from leaking out. And in order to do that, it sometimes has to like produce some like bodily fluids to protect itself from the outer world, and is covered with hairs and pores. And during the process of encountering other individuals, it can be sometimes like cut or wounded or bruised. So skin is like the only place where a living thing is in contact with the outer world. And I started thinking of painting surface as a skin and questioning what's going on to this surface in relation to its inside and outside. I guess that's how I ended up with many images of fruits or cake being cut and showing its inside. Like for example, if you saw the pomegranate for the first time, you would never know what's going on inside until you like cut it and open it up. So that was my decision behind these images. Or even the paper itself, I soaked it partially into water so that it could show this trace of contact with another thing. And I put some cut mandarins, and on the bottom bit, I used this thin layer so that you can see through it. I also put some like zips and eyelets, thinking that the skin is protecting the inside, but at the same time is kind of preventing it from coming into any contact with other individuals, which can be a new possibility or new meaning. So when I was making this, I had a lot of things going on in my head, and I'm kind of still digesting it, trying to figure out what I made. But I'm glad I'm showing this work somehow, even though it's online. So yeah, I think that's the last page of the slideshow. Yeah, great. Yes, that was it. Should I stop sharing?
Okay, thank you. Right now is the Q&A session.
Thank you, Jiyoung. That was really interesting stuff. Great to see your new work alongside the older work. We'd like to invite anybody in the audience to ask any questions of Jiyoung. If there's anything you'd like to follow up on. Better if you ask yourself, but feel free to type into the chat function and I can read the question for you if you prefer. Jiyoung, can I ask a question maybe to begin?
Yeah, of course.
It struck me while you were here, and again when I'm looking at your work again, that your work, it seems to be maybe more influenced by contemporary visual culture, maybe online, web-based visual culture, from my own perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Necessarily maybe traditional painting and sculpture. And while very, very physical, it comes across as visual initially, but then the physicality is a kind of a surprise when I engage with your work personally. I guess my question is this a kind of a deliberate relationship with graphic design, online visual culture, or is this just the world that you kind of exist in, so it comes naturally to you?
I guess because my older works were like really influenced by this digital thing, and it was about this relationship between painting and the digital era. But then like some of my friends are in graphic design, and I think I'm quite influenced by this graphic design language as well, but I'm not consciously referencing those things. So it might be just a thing that I'm used to, or maybe like the language that I feel comfortable about when I'm like expressing something. I don't know. Because when I have this a lot of question about why you use a lot of photography, even though you think your work is painting? It's a bit tricky question, to be honest, but when I'm like conceiving the works, like what to make and what image I need to acquire, there is a certain idea and specific thing that I need to achieve, then I need to think about how to achieve it. But then if it's only available by painting manually, I can paint manually. But if it can be like achieved by more handy technology like inkjet print or something, I just use that technology. So I have no like resistance on like using technology in my works, I guess. And I'm kind of still making works in the format of painting. So maybe that's why it becomes like, I don't know, strange in a sense, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And actually,
Okay.
by way of comparison, I often see maybe older artists that maybe try to make this connection, and it often comes across as forced or artificial, but it seems to be very natural to you, and it comes across that way in the work. And it wasn't necessarily talking about whether you physically paint something or reproduce it mechanically. They are essentially the same things, but it's more about the kind of, yeah, comfortable existence in this world of graphic design, online media, etc.
Yeah, I think that's like, yeah, that's like something that I've been encountering from when I was little. So yeah, I think I'm really like feel comfortable with those images.
It could also be my age.
Yeah, of course, of course.
We have a lot of current students online. Is there any questions from anybody in the audience? No, all quiet. Wow, that's surprising. Okay, more questions for me then. Yay.
Okay.
For your exhibition at the end of your residency here, initially I was going to ask you about your placement of work in space from your first installation shots. It seems that you, again, intuitively choose counterintuitive positions for your paintings, but I think you really explain the rationale for that through the rest of your talk. So that's a kind of a redundant question now. But in your exhibition here, you seem to really find an interesting way for the windows in that space to coexist with your green paintings. It was a window with a green windowsill, and it seemed to be almost the inverse of the windows in your residency while you were here, where you had the green inside the window in your home and you had the green in the frame of the window in the space alongside your green paintings. Was that a happy accident, or were you kind of influenced by that?
I guess it's both. It was mostly, I would say, was happy coincidence, but I feel like Hong Kong had like a lot of green stuff going on, even though it was not like necessarily about nature, like fences or like something in the subway station. I remember many things were actually painted with green, and I think I was initially influenced by that. But then it's also a happy coincidence because I wasn't necessarily thinking about this idea of window, but then my original plan of the installation was that you know, there were like frames on the left and this selected sampled and greens on the right. I initially wanted to paint the whole wall into this gradient color. So it was like the position of each frame, it was kind of like fixed because it's dependent on which color it is positioned within this gradient of colors. But then I couldn't do it because of like a lack of time, and like spraying was like a bit difficult in that space. So yeah, in that sense, it was quite a happy coincidence, I would say.
It worked really well.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I was initially quite frustrated at first that I couldn't like do that wall thing, but I was really happy with the show.
I thought it worked really well. We also, in Kai Tak, we have
Oh,
everywhere.
yeah, those were green as well, I remember.
So I was wondering if it would kind of seeped in while you were here in the studio, looking at these doors and seeing the green outside where you were living also. But
Yeah, probably that was also one of influences, I guess.
and I guess final question I'd ask, more of an observation. You give a kind of a rationale for your use of eggs in your most recent work, but it's definitely a motif. I think nearly every series of works you showed, there was an egg of some way, shape, or form. Is this, do you know where that comes from?
I don't know. I just can't really put my finger on it, but it's definitely constantly coming on my works. Like the last work that I showed you, it also has this fried egg that's flipping over this desk. I think I initially got interested in this egg as a motif because it's similar to how I got interested in the citrus fruits, because it also has this like a chain of structures within this side. Like it's it's covered by shell, but it also has this liquidy form inside. And there is also this egg yolk, which is also round. But then I was also thinking, like, as I told during the talk, like when we buy eggs from the supermarket, there always this vocabulary of like displaying or arranging eggs into certain ways. And it's because of the nature of egg is so fragile and the shape of it is round. So we kind of invented this egg carton in a way. But then I'm interested in how like this makes each egg as so identical and like make us forget that these eggs are inherently different beings. So I guess that's how I got interested in this egg as a motif, but I can't really explain more than that, you know?
Well, sometimes it's best that we don't maybe know or
I
explain.
guess so. I think actually maybe it's better not to know. I don't know.
Great. Well, unless there are any more questions, Jiyoung, I'd like to really thank you for joining us from
Thank you.
Yeah,
London.
it was great to be reconnected.
For sure. And yeah, keep us in touch. Let us know how things are going.
Yeah, that would be really nice. And I hope everyone keeps safe. And I feel like this year could be quite frustrating, especially for our students, because if you have no access to the studio, it's going to be really difficult. And it's the same for artists, other artists in a lockdown situation as well. But like my friends who are working in their rooms, they're trying to do whatever they can do. And I think it's everyone who's like in this situation, in like in abnormal situation. And I hope you don't feel like too guilty about not being so productive, because that's how I'm like feeling sometimes. I feel like this year we have to try our best to just go through safely all together. So I hope you guys all stay safe and like try to make something within the scope of your space you got. Thank you for joining me. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Note to end on.
Great.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Yeah, be safe.
Okay.
Would you like to say anything to wrap up or?
Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. Bye-bye.
Great.
Great. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you again, just Jiyoung.